Today we will study regarding flavorings for the food industry. Now we will try to understand what are flavors and what are flavorings. A very minute difference, but again small difference does matter. We'll also see different types of flavoring substances for different products, and yes, very important, functions of flavoring substances for getting various products or increasing the acceptability of the product. We'll also see the extraction methods for this kind of flavors from natural materials and also synthetic analysis as well as synthetic extraction of these flavoring substances. The important parameters like labelings and rules and regulations will also be covered in this chapter. So let us move with the chapter flavorings for the food industry. So I'll introduce what is a flavor. Now we have two terms, one is flavor and the other is food flavorings. Sometimes we call it a flavor to be added in food, or we say it is a food flavoring. Now both are related terms, but they vary in definition. So let us define. Flavor is created by nature and it is composed by aromatic chemicals that are biosynthesized during the normal metabolic processes in plants and animals, and which may be further modified by subsequent processing. And flavorings, they are totally man-made. They are prepared from natural and or synthetic aromatic substances that may or may not be found in nature. Now there are several definitions of flavors given by different organizations. The Society of Flavor Chemists in the year 1969 has defined flavor as a flavor is a substance which may be a single chemical entity or a blend of chemicals of natural or synthetic origin whose primary purpose is to provide all or part of the particular effect to any food or other product taken in the mouth. Similarly, International Organization of the Flavor Industry IOFI has defined flavor as concentrated preparation with or without solvents or carriers used to impart flavor, which the exception of only salty, sweet or acid taste. It is again not intended to be consumed as such. The Council of Europe has defined flavoring is a substance which has predominantly odor producing properties and which again possibly affects the taste. Now let us see why we add flavor in any food. Definitely flavor has some of the functions, especially we know it increases the acceptability of the food in terms of taste. Other than the taste, why actually the food or the product becomes more acceptable? Because there are mainly three important functions of flavor. First is economic function, second is physiological function, and third, which actually affects the product acceptance, that is the psychological function. In economic function, we see that the flavor actually simulates a particular flavor of the product. So we can flavor unflavored product or we can extend the flavor of the product. Second, as I said, is to extend the flavor of the product. Third, flavor the unflavored. Then to modify the flavor, or we can say to cover some off taste or off flavor. Then we can use it to compensate for flavor losses during processing. And finally, it is used for improving the shelf life as well. Because with longer shelf life of any product, we know there is reduction in the flavor of that product. So to keep the product feel fresh, if a flavor is added, the product tastes better for a longer period. And some of the physiological functions if we see, because any food, when we eat it with happiness, when we eat it in a nice manner, when we are hungry and we eat it, we get better metabolic responses and better digestion of that particular food. So physiological function it has to improve the metabolic response. It increases intestinal absorption, and finally appetite, and definitely because of appetite the consumption of that food increases. And what are the psychological functions? It is nostalgia. Then we have some association with that flavor. We may have some intellect or belief. Such cognitive factors may be there. Then the trend for a certain preference of a flavor like strawberry flavor. If somebody likes that flavor, it's a trend to get that new flavor, we definitely go for it. And final function is to flavor the unflavored, or to say, I should say, flavor the flavored as well. Let us peep into history of the flavor industry, how it started. It dates back about 16th century AD, when during the early days of history, people used spices mainly to enhance or modify the flavor of their foods. Although some of the herbs and spices were grown in many parts of the world, the most important spices came from East, especially from India, Ceylon and the Spice Islands, that is Java, Sumatra, Bali. In the second half of the 16th century, essential oils began to be widely produced. So from these spices, essential oils were produced, and they were predominantly used by pharmacists, which became a factor in the flavor industry only during 19th century. Till then, the flavors were used as such. Finally, during 1608, succinic acid and benzoic acid, very important flavor components, were isolated. In the year 1661, pyroligneous acid was isolated by dry distillation of wood. Then in the year 1769 to 1785, Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Schell was the first to apply solvent extraction of plant and animal products to investigate chemical components. Tartaric, citric, malic, gallic, lactic and uric acids were isolated from natural matters. Finally, in the year 1772 till 1777, Lavoisier from France was the first to shed some light on the chemical nature of these substances, and he identified oxygen and azote as the important component. So during the 19th century, a U-turn came in the history of flavor industry. At that time, Berzelius from Stockholm was the first to refer to the earlier studies as organic chemistry, because definitely most of the flavors were extracted or were from natural ingredients. And Berzelius was actually father of the vital force. Whereas Holler from Germany was the father of synthetic organic chemistry and the first scientist to refute the hypothesis of the vital force. He was the first man who succeeded in preparing synthetic ingredients, and he prepared synthetic urea. Then from 1850 to early 1900 AD, we saw many changes in this process. Most flavors considered of a single chemical at that time. Sophisticated flavors at that time constituted a mixture of 3 or 4 ingredients selected from the 50 available chemicals, and over 90% of the raw materials used for flavors were of natural origin. From 1930s till 1940s, the flavor industry flourished with artificial flavors. After that, slowly people started believing that artificial flavors are not good. So, there were many analytical techniques to prove some of the facts and some of the unknown facts rather. Development of new analytical tools like the gas chromatograph, the mass spectrometer, nuclear magnetic resonance, etc. So, they could analyze different chemicals that are actually affecting a particular flavor and their effect. And finally, during the year 1960s and around 1970s, following the advent of these new analytical tools, a number of new aroma chemicals were identified and became available. Now, we'll move with classification of flavoring substances. First classification, the natural flavoring substances. So they are flavoring substances which are naturally present in plant and animal source materials. As for example, we get coffee flavor from coffee powder or vanilla extract from vanilla beans, that is vanillin. Then next category is artificial or synthetic flavors, in which again we have two categories. One is nature identical flavoring substances and the other one is artificial flavoring substances. A very thin line of difference lies between these two. Nature identical in the sense they are again artificial flavoring substances, but their same chemical structure lies in natural flavoring substances as well, while artificial flavoring substances have no equivalent in nature. As for example, ethyl vanillin is similar to vanillin, but the structure is completely different. Some of the others classes of flavoring substances are flavoring preparations that are complex mixtures whose composition is defined by natural raw materials like fruit extracts, vegetable extracts, etc. Then we have thermal process flavorings which are produced industrially by controlled heating of several components. So we get a Maillard reaction and many end products and different flavoring substances. And finally, we have smoke flavorings. Many smoked meat, smoked product are very common. Even smoked cheese is available in many countries and liked by people. So smoke is obtained by means of controlled burning of hardwood, condensed and then mixed with solvents such as cooking oil or carriers to get this smoke flavorings. Now, how to prepare a flavor? So, a flavor may contain a single chemical ingredient or it may be a mixture of several ingredients. Again, the ratio may vary. Again, varying the ratio will change the flavor. So, there are several approaches to produce a flavor, or I should say to create flavor. First is artistic approach. This approach is solely dependent on the art of a flavor chemist. So, a flavor chemist will determine a ratio of mixture of different chemicals to give a particular flavor, and the senses will actually judge the quality of that flavor. Next approach is scientific approach, which is a mixture of both artistic approach as well as scientific knowledge, which is more fruitful as compared to only artistic approach. Then we have biosynthetic approach, where biotechnology is playing a very vital role because many flavoring ingredients which are scarce in nature, which are not available in abundance, can be synthesized with biotechnological processes, and this approach is very important in this pathway. Then we have thermally produced flavors. So, by heat treatments, by extractions, by distillations, we can produce many of the flavors, and we have many recent technologies. In spite of all these technologies, the best technology till date considered is the artistic approach, again with some scientific input. Now, some of the factors which are affecting the flavor creation process. First is flavor profile of the target, like what kind of flavor we need in that particular flavoring ingredient. So that is the target flavor profile. Next is flavor descriptive language. So it should be described what kind of flavor it depicts. Is it identical to some kind of flavor? It is actually mimicking a particular flavor, or what it is. So flavor descriptive language will also affect the creation of flavor. Then obviously, very importantly, sensory evaluation of that particular flavor, and yes, reproducibility. It is not a one-time process, it should be reproducible. So accordingly, a particular approach selected and taken forward for industrial application. Now some of the analytical techniques for determining flavor components. First task is isolation of volatile flavor components from the bulk of non-volatile matrix, because isolating that flavor component from a raw ingredient is a task, and usually it is done by distillation or extraction or a combination of both these processes. Next step is separation of the isolated components into individual or small groups of components. For this, we can use some modern technologies like column and thin layer chromatography are generally used for rough separations into groups of components, while gas chromatography and HPLC, that is high performance liquid chromatography, are of greater value in determining individual components. Then finally, identification of the flavor components. So retention time data of components can be used for identification using tables of retention indices such as Coates index. Then sniff analysis also can be used, or nowadays mass spectrophotometry, that is GCMS system, are very widely used for this given purpose. Now where are these flavors applied? So applications of flavors include different categories of flavored products. One we may categorize as a flavor dependent product. The product itself doesn't have flavor, it has to be flavored to increase its acceptability, or the product will be rendered unacceptable. So we can have some examples like hard boiled candy, chewing gum, carbonated and non-juice drinks, gelatin desserts, etc. The other category is flavor independent product. So these products can be marketed without flavors like crackers, cereals and nuts. So here we need not add any flavor, it itself has its own flavor. And some products wherein addition of flavor is not legally permitted. As for example, in milk, if a product is called milk, no flavor should be added. If it is orange juice, if it is butter, no flavoring should be added as per legal standards. So in such kind of products, flavor reinforcement is not permitted unless a new identity is to be given to that food. Next application of flavor is direct flavoring, or we can have indirect flavoring. Again, to get new identity, a food such as milk, butter or juice wherein flavor is not permitted to be added. So here we can have different varieties of these products by addition of flavor. Or indirect flavoring, in the sense, indirect flavorings are preparations that might be added by consumers to their home cooked meals or meals, as for example salad dressings, so that are provided to the consumers and consumers are using them as flavoring ingredients. So they are considered under the category indirect flavoring. Next application is for a flavor selection. Flavor selection which depends on specificity of a particular flavor. For example, the same orange juice flavor or orange flavor might taste excellent in some applications but may be less acceptable in many other. So accordingly, depending on the specificity of a particular flavor and matching with a particular food product, a particular flavor should be selected. Now, forms of flavors that are available in market. The flavors may be available in liquid form, very commonly used, may be in powder form or as pastes or emulsions. Liquid form again in water, or if it is not soluble in water, may be in alcohol or it is oil soluble, wherein the solvents used may be alcohol, propylene glycol, triacetylene, benzyl alcohol, glycerin, syrup, water, vegetable oil, etc. For powders, they may be spray dried, absorbents or maybe powder mixes, where the solvents or carriers, I should say, used are gum acacia, starch hydrolysates, selective hydrocolloids, simple carbohydrates. Then final form is pastes and emulsions. Emulsion of the oil in water type is the form of this particular type of flavoring substance. So, the same ingredients as used in powder and liquid can be used to get this type of flavor in the market. Now, there are flavor regulations whose purpose is to assure safety for the consumer and definitely prevent deception. The labeling regulations require that the information be provided on the kind of food, its processing, and the additives contained in it. And finally, most food regulations are formulated to put a stop to practices where flavor might be used to give false values. Now, flavor safety. Only regulated ingredients that are recognized to be safe are permitted. Now, how to determine which of the flavoring ingredients are safe and are permitted? So, for this, there are certain types of systems that are regulating the addition of these flavor components in food, which can be listed here. One is positive list system, wherein flavoring raw materials that are believed to be innocuous and safe for use in food are listed. Next is negative list system, wherein record materials that shall not be used in flavorings because they are known to be harmful, and also it lists for which an upper consumption limit has been fixed. And there is mixed system, which combines the advantages of both positive and negative list system. So accordingly, the flavor addition has to be regulated in any food product. Other than the E-coding system and INS numbering system, the flavors are listed under a special system by FSMA. Now, what is FSMA? The Flavor and Extract Manufacturers Association. It is from United States and was founded in the year 1909 by several flavor firms in response to the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Through it's generally recognized as safe, that is GRAS assessment of flavoring substances. FSMA, as we defined, is also a founding member of the International Organization of the Flavor Industry, that is IOFI, which is an association of regional and national associations of the flavor industry headquartered in Switzerland. Now, as far as labeling of the flavoring substances are concerned, let us see what is the important aspect which should be considered. Now, flavors are declared in the finished food products according to national food labeling regulations. The labeling of foods in relation to added flavors is regulated in many countries, and the purpose is to label the flavors in conformity with their true nature so that consumers will be properly advised as to the type of the flavors used. Although regulations differ greatly from one country to another, the chief objective is to differentiate among the main types of flavors, that is natural flavors, maybe nature identical flavors wherever it is applicable, artificial flavors or mixtures of natural flavors and nature identical or artificial flavors. So these terms that are stated is for the purpose of simplification of terminology, which is considered natural or artificial in one country is not necessarily perceived as such in another country. So to conclude, I should say there is definitely a great boom in demand for flavors in markets, mainly due to consumer acceptance is the sole basis of acceptability of any product in the market. Yes, and obviously there is need for processing of foods to get shelf life extension, or you should say production of ready to eat or ready to serve food products. So where we find loss of flavorings due to processing. So in such kind of products, we need to add some kind of flavor to enhance its acceptability. One more important point is natural flavors are much in demand but are much expensive as compared to simulated synthetic flavors. But yes, because they are in demand, we need to get some cost-effective manufacturing techniques for such kind of natural flavors. And also, if we want to use similar synthetic flavors, we need to analyze the safety aspect of these synthetic flavors in the present era. And finally, I should say, future demand for flavoring substances is bound to increase in leaps and bounds, and with widening of its applicability and with increase in a number of food products. So we have seen from the chapter that there is a boom in demand for flavorings in the food industry because we are going for many new products every day. But again, we will prefer natural flavors which are very costly. So cost effective extraction and getting such kind of natural flavors is demand for future, and also we expect much more demand for such kind of flavors in our future prospectus. Thank you.